Hello, I'd like to talk to you today about the ethics of presentation. This is something that isn't often discussed or written about, but it's just as important as the ethics of any other point in the research process. The first thing to consider is who's going to be in your audience? Who is this presentation for? And how can you meet those people's needs? You won't necessarily know the answer to this. You might have to use your imagination to try and figure it out as best you can. But it's worth doing that piece of imaginative work because it will help you to put your work across in a way that will be better received. Keep your presentation simple and straightforward, especially if you've only got a short amount of time, like these little videos. You need to keep it simple so that people can understand what you're saying and remember the points that you make. Every presentation reveals things to its audience and also conceals other things. It's never possible to reveal everything. You can't tell the whole story of anything. It's too complex. But it's important to recognise that when you're planning what to say in your presentation, you're also making decisions about what you're not going to say. It's worth being aware of that, being conscious of it. Using reflexivity can be useful here to help you work out this aspect of your presentation. And the key is to aim to present enough of your work so that audiences can judge your work for themselves. So presenting some of the things that didn't go so well as the things that did go well, for example, might be something to consider. Of course, this is going to vary between different people's presentations because content and context vary enormously. But if you keep these key points in mind, it will help you as you present your work. Another thing to think about is if you're talking about your participants, your research participants, it's important to take care of their anonymity and their confidentiality, unless they actually want to be seen, unless they want to be named. Although some research ethics committees are still not in favour of this, even if it is what participants want. But my view is that it's ethical to let participants choose because participants often have a much better idea about the risks presented to them by being named or not named in a presentation than some remote research ethics committee. It may be that you want to present your work with a participant or two. Presentation doesn't have to be individual, it can be collaborative. However, including participants can take time, it may cost money, and sometimes participants are excluded effectively by institutional requirements or lack of budget or resource. However, it's again worth considering, worth thinking through, and maybe worth trying if you can. In some cases, participants may give a presentation with you in support. That might be an ethical way to go forward, depending on the nature of your research. When you're presenting, it's always worth using at least two methods of presentation. You might think a video is just one method, but actually you can probably see me and hear me. So that's kind of two methods. Or you might be using the subtitles, the captions on YouTube. And again, that gives you a second method. The classic thing is PowerPoint and a person. There are many other options, including creative options. Research has been presented in the form of plays, for example, or with poems, or using other forms of technology, using interactive methods such as Mentimeter or Slido. But generally, if you're using at least two methods, that's helpful. There is research evidence that shows that this helps the audience to remember and to understand what it is that you're telling them, which surely is the main point of the exercise. If you're using PowerPoint, don't read out your slides to your audience because that's really dull. Most people can read perfectly well for themselves and faster than you can speak. There are occasional exceptions, perhaps if you have a very short poem or a little data extract that you want them to hear rather than see. If you're going to put it on a slide as well, I would suggest reading it first and then showing the slide with it on, because reading out your slides is one surefire way to make a presentation very boring. And I argue that it is not ethical to bore your audience. Really, you need to be telling a story of some kind. Not once upon a time, there were 3 witches and some frogs and a cauldron, not that kind of story, but the story of your research, the story of the part of your research that you want to tell in this presentation. And you'll probably be using two kinds of truth. You'll be using some absolute truth, probably presenting some facts, some findings that you're confident about, and also some authentic truth in the way that you tell your story. This is where we say in England, in English, that something rings true. That's a metaphor from bell making or bell ringing. If a bell is cracked, it makes an unpleasant note. It doesn't ring true. And when you think about this, think about perhaps a film that you've seen or a story that you've read that really gripped you, that really drew you in. A fictional story, but one that you couldn't put the book down or you couldn't stop watching the film till you found out what happened. That story or that film rang true for you. It felt true, however fictional it was, it felt really true. And that is authentic truth. It's the truth that our hearts speak to the hearts of other people. And that is as important in presenting as absolute truth. And overall, if you can include all of these key points, take them all into account as you're preparing and giving your presentation, this will give your audience the best chance of understanding and remembering the points you want to make. And if we're not going to do that, there's really not much point doing presentation at all.